So today's agenda, we're going to start with James. Hopefully, you're all right, James, to be the first speaker. Yeah, nodding, great. So James will talk about the Highbourne Group's ED&I approach. And remember, the purpose of these webinars is just for people to share where they are currently are on their ED&I stories. And what's really nice, journey, sorry, and what's really nice is everyone's at different places. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, I haven't done an awful lot, some of us haven't done very much, it's okay. It's okay to be somewhere. The whole point of the coalition is that we're all going to get on the journey together and share and learn from each other. So James is going to go first. We'll have some time for some question and answers, and then Nikki will talk about the Huws Gray's journey. And then at the end, I'll just remind you what's coming up next in terms of the plans for International Women's Day. So that's the plan. Then we'll move on. So James, I'm going to put your slides up. If you just let me know when you want to just move slides, and when you're ready, I will just keep clicking forward for you.
Yeah.
Over to you, James.
Thank you. Can everyone, or maybe Anthea, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah,
right?
Yeah, no problems. Yeah.
Good. Excuse me. Why is it whenever you say, oh, I'm about to do a presentation, your voice suddenly goes a bit funny? And
Oh dear, have you got any water? Yeah.
It's all fine. Right, presenter's curse. So yeah, one thing to add into what Andrew's saying is also, I think this is a reflection for me in the moment now as well, is things kind of go fast and then they go a bit slow and then they go fast and slow again. And we're in a bit of a moment where I'm thinking, gosh, we need to go again. We need to rebuild momentum. So the slides I'm going to run you through and the update I'm going to give talks about our journey. I guess don't think of the kind of being a glorious finish and we've zoomed along on the journey and now everything's perfect. Actually, I'm feeling a little bit like I'm back to square one on a few things, if I'm completely honest. So really happy to share that as we go through. The risk of any presentation is it sounds all glossy and wonderful, doesn't it? And I wanted
Don't worry, James. I'm coming next. I'm definitely not all nice and new and glossy. You're fine.
Yeah, good.
So we want realistic. We want realism, not glossy.
Yeah, we're getting that.
So this is a risky comment as well, but what I'm going to summarize now is a bit of a journey that and using the majority of the content that I talked through when we launched the CIC back at a BMF event in September. And this is risky, just in case anyone was there. Go, oh, I've seen that. Click, I'm off. But if you were there or have seen some of that content, I hopefully am going to talk about it consistently. And by all means, feel free to chip in and carry on the slides if you feel you could do a better job and have seen it before. But no, that's the one side, right? Do you want to go into the next slide, please?
Yeah.
So yeah, nice slide. Lots of people. Hopefully, not many small words on the slide as well. So the next slide. Let's think. Get to right. So overall, what I want to talk about is how we've approached diversity and inclusion in general, making it part of our everyday activity at Highbourne Group. And in some ways, as I've said earlier, part of our activity every day in Highbourne Group is kind of goes in peaks and troughs. It's at our best, it's activity that it happens every day. A few years ago, we also won a BMF Diversity and Inclusion Award, which I think was a fantastic recognition. But it's all Nikki. Was that a hand? No, it's accidental, was it?
Sorry. No, I have no idea how I use Google Meet. So I was trying to do a clap. You can do that really easily in Teams.
Click on the little emoji symbol.
Yeah. I'll learn. Don't worry. Sorry, I don't mean to
yeah.
heckle in any way, shape, or form. I'm so sorry.
I love it. Keep going, James.
I was ready to hand over the baton. I thought you were going to take me up on doing the presentation for me. But anyway, and I think for us, that wasn't a recognition of where we've got to. That was more just extra energy for us in the start of our journey. And so why do I refer to it? Not because we won the award, but more because I think things like these little wins and little awards are really important at the start of a journey in order to tell people that actually this is done for a reason and it's meaningful. And so and I wouldn't be put off applying for the awards either, because in the different businesses and industries that I've been in, I wouldn't say that our award submission was going to compare with anything that I would have done at Vodafone, as a good example. As a much bigger business, much bigger budgets, the PLC with an ambition and a social purpose that was completely different to our business here. So, it's all about where you are on the journey, I think, and actually showing progress, and showing that progress internally is really helpful with things like the awards. I'm sure you introduced me from a role point of view, Anthea, so I won't go back and do that. But
I didn't actually.
didn't you? So I'll,
No.
so I should say I'm the Chief People Officer for Highbourne Group, and I guess some teams can have dedicated diversity and inclusion resources, and some teams can't. Some teams have even nominated people from within the business that say they're going to take the lead of it. And what I guess I wanted to say right at the beginning is we don't, and probably like most of your business, we don't have a dedicated person that drives this. So this is very much done from the team and by the people in the team. And actually, rather than being a particular problem, it's definitely hard work and you can't delegate. But actually, I do see that as quite a good thing, because it means that diversity and inclusion and creating an inclusive culture has to then be a subject for everyone. And if you really focus on it being a subject for everyone, then you're going to approach the issues in a way that are probably relevant for the audience, and certainly relevant for the start of a journey, to build momentum. So if those of you don't know Highbourne Group, that's probably because we never trade under Highbourne Group, and the title might not mean anything. So we're brands like City Plumbing, PTS, Plum Nation, Underfloor Heating Store, Plum World, DHS, NSS, lots of different brands. City Plumbing and PTS are our big branch-based brands. The rest of them are smaller e-commerce or direct supply brands, all with different types of colleagues in there. So we've got your clearly, I fall into this category, but we've got your classic support center or central function teams, through to warehouse teams, branch teams, drivers, sales teams that are out there nationally as well, and guest sales in branch as well. We've got a real mixture of different role types and people. And as you'll see when you flick through some of the slides a little bit later, the lady that you can see on screen at the moment, she's one of our showroom sales managers. We got massive disparities in role types, from all male, pretty much, drivers, through to more female than male showroom sales managers. And it's the role type that attracts different people, and and creates some of that diversity for us. So one of the things we've got, and sort of going off on a slight tangent, is when we publish our gender pay gap report. Our gender pay gap report is actually shows we've got a slight pay bias towards women, which might indicate, actually, to be fair, anything that's not equal is a problem, isn't it? In any direction, if I'm honest, it should be fair pay and it should be consistent. That's more a reflection of some of the way in the way in which these different role types have different biases in them, that then grows up through the organization. Just so it happens that drivers and warehouse colleagues are more predominantly male and lower paid than showroom sales managers, who are more female and higher paid, and therefore that creates a bit of a disparity as we go through. So what am I saying there? What's the point of that point in the preamble? It's it's also saying don't always believe the data, because it doesn't tell the whole of the story. It gives you a snapshot into something. And when I talk about data later, I'm a big data person, but I don't like targets in this area, because they can often send the wrong signal. Or in the gender pay gap example, they could tell us we don't have a problem when in fact we have lots of different problems. They're just not indicated by that particular piece of data. What? So I think probably the last summary. These what I've got here is these are the topics I'll go through on the next set of slides. And as much as anything, I'll talk to you about how we think about inclusion and share examples of some of the things we've done in practice. I don't believe there's any particular special recipe to create an inclusive culture, but I do think that by doing these things and maybe looking back and categorizing things into these chunks, it's not a recipe as such, but they're important areas to consider. And it is a bit cliched to say that it's not rocket science, but I can see lots of examples where things go wrong even though actually there are some pretty straightforward things that should get done. So there's clearly a lot about this topic that might seem easy on the surface, but actually becomes really, really hard to achieve. And I'll try and talk you through a few of those topics as we get through the slides. Um, and I think probably the last bit on this slide is one of my biggest beliefs is that you have to really start with a good intention, and therefore you've got to believe this as a company. You've got to have that good intention and then be really open about it in order to create any sort of momentum whatsoever. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean partly if roles like mine, but particularly the CEO, don't talk openly about this and don't say that there is a good intention, even if there isn't great practice that exists either in the past or still a work in progress, then I think that that's one of the fundamentals to get right at the beginning. Let's go on to the next slide, please, Anthea.
Yeah.
So so yeah, from the 4 topics of have ambition, align some big things, follow through with important details, and keep learning. When I talk about having ambition, we have an ambition that we created ourselves, and this is so that we know that we're all heading in the same direction. Being honest, again, I'll say that we've would have been great to have this perfectly. Actually, would you go on one more slide?
Yep.
Sorry, I keep forgetting I've put in these interim slides in as well. It would be great to have an ambition from day one, but it's actually something that we developed along our journey when we realized we weren't all talking about things in the same way. And what it did for us is it became really important for us to get focused on the same important parts. So having that intention, being clear about what it is, and then getting focused was important. It could be that you use the Construction Inclusion Coalition pledge as your ambition. That's fine. But the important thing is you're creating a reason that you can use, and you use that reason to then drive actions. For us, the ambition, it continues to be helpful because it gives us a reason to believe in a more inclusive business and just describes what we mean by it. And so I'll read it out and pause on the bold parts. We don't have the bold parts normally bold, but they're bolded for the purposes of this, just to kind of capture what they mean and to focus in on some of the important points. So in building on who we are, it's all about meeting teams where they are now. And I think it's the bit where they are now is really important. It's also about taking the business forwards and removing a fear about diversity and inclusion. There'll be colleagues who think that this is in some way some kind of woke agenda and not something for them. But overall, it sets the tone for the majority. And it also says to us symbolically that it's an important topic. And it's something that we're involving ourselves in and getting engaged in. We've got some varied experiences and ideas that we call that out specifically because we're talking about how inclusion can help us in lots of different ways. And actually, we're not trying to say there's a perfect way of doing this. It's all about getting those different perspectives and creating a culture of inclusion. And specifically when we refer to best self, in here, again, that's a really important point because we're talking about making sure we don't have clones. We want our colleagues to be themselves. So we're not trying to create a specific template of an organization. What we're trying to do is focus on inclusion and build a place where everyone can bring the best version of themselves and therefore be authentic in that way. And then when we talk about being supported, I think this could be read as something for minority group colleagues, but actually it's a statement that's in there for everyone. Because it's much about feeling and being supported if you're the white heterosexual British male colleague. And in that sense, the support is about how to create an inclusive culture, how to lead in and particularly from a management or leadership position, how to lead. And the support for those colleagues is as important as support for the minority colleagues. It's about making sure that inclusion therefore is truly inclusive, no matter which part of the inclusion spectrum or agenda we're talking to. Does that make sense? I'll pause there.
Yep.
Cool. So next one, please. So yeah, for big things. So the ambition is a big thing on its own, and having a leadership team that's fully bought into it again is quite a big thing and an important thing. But we show our intentions with some other big symbolic things that we do as well. So on the next slide, we've got our company behaviours. And so we've got 4 company behaviours, and we have, as I'm sure, like in many of your businesses, safety is a huge priority for us. And then when we became Highbourne Group, we created a behaviour that covered both physical health and safety, but also included psychological safety. Um, in other words, making sure that we're a place that you're physically safe, but also feel that you can be yourself and express yourself, and therefore broaden the topic of safety within our company behaviours for those reasons. It's quite subtle to some degree, and some colleagues do get it and some colleagues don't get it, but the ones that are looking for it really get it, and actually it helps create that right start point. So overall, we used it therefore to set the right tone, and it gives permission for the different teams and parts of our group to align to something. It helps people align, and when we use it to introduce diversity and inclusion, so that we know that diversity and inclusion work links back to our company behaviours, aligns with the I guess physical and psychological safety as well. So we create that common thread going through processes and team communications as well. We also use the phrase "belong with us" as part of our HR strategy, and that brings together lots of topics that look to create the culture of belonging. And so we use it as a hashtag in things like job adverts or social media posts. Um, and again, it helps us set the tone both internally and externally that belonging is important to us as well. So those are a couple of the first big things there. Next slide, please. And another big thing for us is change makers, and this is one of the areas where we're kind of having to go back a little bit to then go forwards, because we had some momentum and it's petered out a little bit. But this is a volunteer group that's come from all of our different businesses, um, a group of people basically who are champions and energetic about diversity and inclusion. We've used this group to focus the energy that was already there in some places, and get the energy focused into something that can have a bigger impact and a broader impact across the whole business. Stops the people being hobbyists in their own team essentially, and helps amplify it and gives them a route out. That's one of the big ideas there. It includes people from across the whole country, branch teams, support centre teams, people in all of our brands as well. And whilst many of the change makers have something that is driving them to want a more inclusive business and a specific topic that they're more passionate about, they're actually set up as a group that's allies for inclusion in general. And that's a really important principle, is that we've come back to time and time again, which will be it's about inclusion in general that just has different areas that amplify and spike at different points. We started with change makers probably 2.5 years ago now, two and a half years ago. And in that time, all of the network groups beneath have been set up. The groups are there to provide education, advice, support, and a safe place to discuss each of these topics, these areas of diversity and inclusion. They're open to anyone, and we've found that they're very helpful both to educate and inform the wider business, as well as to support colleagues as well. And I'm sure if anyone's experimented with network groups in your companies or been part of other companies, it's quite a common format and a common way of setting things up. And we've, they've done things like the obvious, where we've had things like Pride Month, and the LGBTQ plus community network has been the catalyst that's driven the engagement events and provided, I guess, communication and support as we've gone through that. So they're both kind of a support network, but also a doing network and engagement network as well. And what we've tended to do is, rather than define where we should have these topics, we've gone to follow the energy and ideas that come from the change makers, in order to set up the groups, to get the groups led, Some of our early learnings were that if you try and force this too much, you end up with a group of people that are not necessarily committed to taking action. So you've really got to, in our experience, and I think this is where we are at the moment, is you've got to go with the ebbs and flows of the energy. And if you force it too much, it kind of doesn't get done, or gets done for the wrong reasons. And so therefore, creating the environment where it's an activity and it's a topic that colleagues know they're supported in and they can invest time in and channel their natural energy into it has got us far more results. And there's I guess probably to illustrate this point in a different way, I was a little bit skeptical of having a parent network in the first instance, but actually it turned out to be one of our biggest supported groups, because that's where the energy went inside the business as well. So probably another good example of, in my example, I wasn't the best person to judge what was the right network or the wrong network, or someone centrally isn't, because on that instance I'd have probably called it a little bit wrong, based on what I thought the organisation might want. So we're going to have a quick sip of water and then we'll go to the next one, please. So if we've got an ambition, we've got a few big things that we can make inclusion visible and make sure that it's known at the centre of our culture. The real progress happens when we focus on lots of little things that make a difference to inclusion, in a way that moves us towards it's just the way in which we do things around here. That's the intent here. So on the next slide, what we've got is a list of a lot of the things, but not all of the things that we focused on. They're always led from different teams, and where possible, the intent with all of these is to make them part of the normal ways of doing things inside our business. I'll pick out a couple of the examples. I'm certainly not going to run through a whole list, because we'll run out of time, and it's certainly not the most interesting part of the presentation. But some of them, even though they might seem silly or trivial, it can often be about getting the basics right that really create the foundation for that inclusive culture. Because you can get shot down if you've got some of the basics wrong, but you're talking about some big aspirational message that's out there. Some common D&I themes you'll see in there, like reverse mentoring or gender decoding. If so, gender decoding doesn't always make sense of them. Basically, that just means making sure that when you're looking at any piece of written text, particularly job adverts, the language needs to be either gender neutral, or you need to be certainly gender aware of what you're doing. There's an area where actually there's sometimes we've gender coded adverts to be slightly more appealing to women rather than men, because in my experience and looking at the applicant rates, the men just apply anyway. So if the adverts were worded in a way that put off female applicants, that was a negative. Whereas actually on the other side, if it was worded more towards attracting women, it didn't make a difference to the male applicants, but did bolster the number of female applicants, which meant we got a more gender balanced long list, an application list. So that, I think that's that one. One of the more unusual ones was an audit of toilets. We have a large range of city plumbing branches, from some really old and tired ones through to some ones that we've opened recently within the last few months. And we get a real variation of the quality of the worked environment, and particularly the behind the scenes environments that's there. And there was a discussion we were having about how our culture and how welcoming our culture and our branches are. And I think the intent was there to say, well, we want to make sure as an employer we've got I guess the right language, and we've got, let's say we've done the gender decoding on boarding guides, and we've made sure that it's an inclusive workplace. But if we're not paying attention to the detail, and the women's toilets is a good example, then we're not delivering properly on it. We're not taking it seriously enough, and actually that's the day-to-day thing that's going to be the biggest issue. To give you the example, we're finding that toilets were used as storerooms, or didn't have sanitary bins in place, or were locked actually, so someone had to go and ask for the key to then go and get into it, with the right intent potentially to say, we'll stop it being used for something else, but actually again creates all of these little things creating barriers. So when I talk about some of the might seem like a detail, but it's a really important point. And it's one of my frustrations is it's still one of the battlegrounds that I've got within the business, and it still hasn't necessarily always been resolved in a way that is supported end to end through facilities and through the I guess the general upkeep and mindset. We also want to make inclusion visible, a visible part of what happens from day one. So we make sure that inclusion is talked about from onboarding day one, or through job adverts, to be honest, and then through recruitment processes, through and through onboarding and colleagues. And again, this is really important because it sets the expectation about what it's like from the beginning. So anyone that comes in with any particular bias or any particular preconception, there's something there straight away through the application process or onboarding that challenges that and looks to set the a different expectation. And we've also done some normal things of investing in workshops with colleagues to understand other perspectives, or to help resolve differences when perhaps we've had I guess, yeah, let's say things have gone wrong. We've had things that have turned out to be either misunderstood or perhaps badly delivered. But make sure we resolve those things in a not necessarily full on mediation, but heading in that sort of direction, making sure we've got a team intervention that can get supported as well. So moving on to the final slide, really, and it's the next one, which is we really have just got to keep learning. Actually, so yeah, no, it is this slide. Yeah, next one, please. Yeah, so how do we do this? Well, keeping on learning, we listen to feedback. So obvious, really, but making sure we consciously go out there, seek and listen to feedback using data and real practical examples. So because inclusion is part of our company behaviours, it's a more legitimate part of things like engagement surveys or branch and team listening events. So again, that foundation of the behaviour really means that we can now then make it a specific piece of feedback and specifically talk to colleagues, because we've essentially put a big banner up there to say it's what we expect as part of our culture. Clearly, we've got internal processes for things like grievance and whistleblowing as well that are there, but ultimately those end up being processes for escalation rather than the norm. But I guess as importantly as listening to the feedback, it's how we deal with the feedback that's more important. So hearing it and then acting on it becomes the most important thing. And so our aim, therefore, is to make things continually better and to continue on that journey and make sure that then that culture of listening and acting on feedback is a core part of what we do. We do use data, as I said at the beginning, but again, it's not a target. So the target can create the wrong behaviour, and our purpose and our ambition is to create change rather than just track to a KPI. And so the data you'll see on screen is the gender diversity change that we've had over the last 18 months. But it's not a target. I guess some of the language, and again, having an ambition rather than a goal, means that it's an ongoing journey, and it's something we need to keep focused on every day. And one thing that I make sure that I do is to unpick examples and learn about why things did or didn't work, and what that might mean. So I've even run this type of discussion with the CEO and my peer group, where we had a particular it was a particular laugh and a joke in a particular meeting. Actually, everyone was involved laughing and joking, but the context of the laugh and joke could have been and was interpreted slightly different by different people. And it was an exercise that I slowed everyone. I came back to actually at a follow-on meeting, slowed everyone down and talked about how actually banter and humour can be a helpful thing, but also it can be a really unhelpful thing. It was a good way for us to tee up the different perspectives, the way in which that could get interpreted as a way to talk about unconscious bias, and ways to be a successful ally for the leadership team as well. So I think the examples, particularly when things don't go quite right, is a really good route into team conversation. Good. Now, I think I've talked over the question and answer time that you allocated in the agenda, Anthea. I better stop there.
Yeah, does anyone have, because I know we had a bit of time at the end, the last one. So does anyone have a question? I'm not going to force it, but if anyone does, would they like to put their hand up or put in the chat box? And if you haven't got one, but you've got one by the time Nikki's finished speaking, that's fine as well. We can always come back to this at the end. So I'll just give it. Don't think anybody's typing. So nothing urgent, but feel free to ask questions once we come back at the end after Nikki. So Nikki, are you all right to should we just move on and do your slot? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thanks, James. Thanks very much. We'll move on and we'll come back to questions at the end. Okay. So Nikki, over to you.
Grand. If you just move to the next slide, thanks,
Yep.
Andy.
Yep.
So, so I thought it might be useful to firstly introduce myself and our CEO, because broadly speaking, we're very new, both to Huws Gray, but also to the industry. So this is a little bit of our background, really. And what I was keen to do, I suppose, was present a bit of our credentials in our background, because Huws Gray isn't necessarily going to demonstrate the credentials for DEI in and of itself right now. So you'll see that we're quite early on in our journey. So I joined as CPO for the group back in January of last year. I have been in HR and in businesses for about 28 years. Most of the businesses I've been in have been pretty keen on DEI being at the forefront of the people agenda. I came from Costa Coffee most recently, and that's probably the most diverse organization I've worked within in terms of its ability to stretch and transform to the world that we live in today, rather than getting stuck in some of the more traditional behaviors. So I loved the experience in Costa, because it was quite a it was a pretty diverse organization, and the colleagues in Costa were just brilliant and passionate about making sure we knew what we were doing wrong and what we needed to do differently. So loved that. And similar to James, we had a great setup of multiple different colleague networks, which again were incredibly informative, and some very, very brave individuals. So hoping at some point we can try and replicate that experience in Huws Gray. Dash Gupta joined Huws Gray as CEO in January. So he's literally, I think he still likes to say he's 33 days in, but he is, but he's equally, and probably way more than I have, he's got some incredible credentials when it comes to DEI. So he was the vice president of the Institute of Motor Industry's Diversity Task Force when he led Marshall's Motor Group, as well as driving significantly better and more diverse colleague networks. He was listed as a role model for inclusion in the retail index as well. He won awards. So I think we've got a great foundation in terms of the passion at leadership level for the agenda. So that was why I wanted to kind of introduce us, really. So just move on to the next slide, just in case people aren't aware of Huws Gray's current setup. So Huws Gray was born out of a building merchant based in North Wales. They have every 5 years they have doubled in size through acquisition mainly, and then they took on the great strength that was taking on a number of different brands from the Grafton Group 2 years ago. So what you see in front of you now is how it is now made up, which is vastly different to 2 years ago. Couple of the things that are incredibly different about Huws Gray to 2 years ago: it has trebled in size overnight. It trebled in size, which is clearly has its own challenges to deal with. The merchanting brand, the building merchanting brand, has broadened quite significantly through the acquisition of Billbase. So it has now become a national brand, and it wasn't a national brand before that point. And as part of the Grafton acquisitions, we took on a number of specialist distribution businesses, which all of which have their own brands and their own complexities and different ways of working. So David took on Goliath, and we've got a long way to go to really integrate as one Huws Gray, I would say. So if you go on to the next slide, Anthea. The point I wanted to make really about Huws Gray is we are definitely at the beginning of our DEI journey. That's not to say we haven't done anything, but there is a lot for us to do, and there's a lot really for us to consolidate and really if you think about James's kind of picture of how the Highbourne Group have tried to kind of create a narrative and then have a plan, we don't have a narrative, we don't have a plan. So that's how far at the beginning of our journey we are. So what have we done today? So I'm kind of concentrating on the last year, which I can at least shine a light on what's been done whilst I've been in the business, but it's not much. It's still a part of the journey. So believe it or not, we hadn't got any DEI, any kind of equality inclusion training in place. So we put in place a really good set of online and workshop type training for the senior leaders. So 60 of our senior leaders went through this last year. And it included some of the slightly more complex topics such as microaggressions, banter, etc. So all of which we know we have to start from the top. So there was absolutely no point rolling out any kind of learning initiative until we'd gone and worked with our senior leaders. The plan this year is to roll that out across the rest of the organisation. We have provided some support. We've in some areas of our business, this isn't consistent, but in some other areas of our business, we've really put a lot of attention on mental well-being. So we do partner with a charity called Mates in Mind, who are very specifically, or at least started out being specifically for the construction industry, and really recognise the need to focus much more on mental health. They have now broadened their focus outside of construction and also towards all well-being, not just mental health. And we also partnered with Liggy Webb, who, if anyone knows Liggy, she has got a great little set of very easy to digest little pamphlets that have really gone down well in the organisation, simply because you can pick them up, put them down, read them in 3 or 4 minutes, and they're just really good and insightful, and almost make it kind of like a child's book, but not in a patronising way, but just in a really easy to read way. Gender pay, James talked about gender pay. Our gap is really low, but probably for very similar reasons. We have a low volume of females generally in the business. Our bonus gender pay gap is big. And again, that's because of the levels of roles that we've got in the business that are occupied by females. So a bit more work to do on that, but at least we're highlighting where we know we've got problems. And we've just started to showcase some of our role models in the business. So we started with gender, a little bit like CIC. We've started with gender, and we actually do have some absolutely awesome female managers in the organisation. So we're just trying to role model them, showcase them internally, and just start to understand from them what it's like to be a female manager in the organisation in an industry that is male dominated. And we're starting to learn really quickly what some of that is. Really interesting that James has talked about toilets, because that's one of the things that absolutely has come out from them already. The other thing that's come out, which feels like a no-brainer, but unfortunately is the current scenario, is uniform. We literally only have one type of uniform, and it doesn't give a choice for body shape in any way, shape or form. So again, we looks like we've got some really simple basics to get right, really, to ensure that we're more authentically supportive of diversity. So we move to the next slide. So that's what we've done so far. So we've got some near-term actions that we're really clear about, that we've already got in train. So as I've said, we've got the DEI training that we're about to roll out. It has gone down well, actually, with the leaders, to the point where they were asking for more than we had already got in plan. So for me, that's always the best type of learning, when people are asking for more than you've got on plan. We having come together as a number, we've actually got 16 brands. The majority of those brands came together at the beginning of 2022, so we're very early on having that number of brands. With that number of brands comes that number of policies and procedures and processes. So right now we're right in the middle of consolidating all of our policies into one group narrative around DEI, flexibility, family friendly, and we're about to launch a dedicated whistleblowing line, etc. So really foundational, but really important for that sense of fairness and consistency in the business across brands. One of the big things that Huws Gray as a business has not done since it's come together under all the brands is we haven't done any kind of surveying. We haven't done any kind of formalized listening to our teams. So we have literally just signed up to a 5-year deal with Great Place to Work. That will kick off before the summer. And really, we're going to start the process of really understanding the benchmark of where we are today, and what we need to do to start really driving ourselves towards being a great place to work. As part of that, as you would expect, there'll be a number of demographic questions. There'll be much more useful feedback around how people feel they belong in the organisation, and that will help us drive towards that. One of the things that I did learn from Costa was that no matter what you do with diversity, actually it's slightly different for every single manager when they're managing a team, and they have a slightly different makeup of team, and therefore they have a slightly different requirement from the next manager in terms of how they're managing their teams. So one of the things we did in Costa, which I'm going to happily bring to bear into Huws Gray as well, is we launched a series of fact sheets. Again, not rocket science, but really trying to give some hints and tips to managers that they can just get off the shelf as and if they ever need them. And we're starting with a number of different neuro type conditions, but it's about how the managers can really just support their team both sensitively but also kind of fairly appropriately in the moment. And they're just helpful hints and tips, etc. We did get quite a lot of kudos in Costa for some of these fact sheets in terms of how helpful they were and how realistic they were depending on the conditions. So we're going to be rolling those out fairly rapidly into Huws Gray. And then the final foundational step we've got is that we have a number of, not only have we got a number of policies and procedures, we also have a number of systems to do with HR. And so just getting a level of consistency so that we actually can even get a data baseline is going to be really helpful. So we are pulling together into one system, which should go live in April. We had, when I joined, we had 10 different payrolls, 4 different pay dates, 3 different systems. So all of that creates a sense of inconsistency and lack of fairness. So that's been one of our foundational steps as well. So that's our near-term actions. And then long-term, Thank you. So this final slide. So we have just kicked off quite a big piece of work on our entire ESG strategy. So DEI clearly will form part of that in our business planning process. We're very much looking at the UN 17 global goals, and how we formulate our strategy around that. Clearly, there are a number of those goals that are very aligned to people, fairness, consistency, leveling out. So we will be building that narrative and some of our more ambitious goals and aspirations through that, so it becomes a formal part of our business strategy rather than a conversation Nick is trying to have on her own around the business. Is very much formulating from that business planning cycle. So we will see this as a big part of our strategy going forward. So for my part, that again, that's why I started with Dash's credentials, because I know that that will be a very critical part of landing any goals and ambitions that we've got, that the CEO is actually a big passionate believer in it. So as you can see, we may be big as an organisation, but we are still very much in our infancy when it comes to our DEI journey. But hopefully, and we were absolutely delighted to become a strategic partner with CIC, because we can see how we can help drive this across the industry, but also we can get help as well because we are so early in our journey. So that was me.
Great. So we have got 9 minutes for any questions. Let people have a think and use the chat box or put your hands up. Anyone want to start? So I've got Claire. Do you want to go first? I think you're on mute still, Claire. Yeah.
Apparently I've got an unstable internet connection, so let me know if you can't hear me. I just wondered, with regards to the online and workshop training on DE&I and including microaggressions, is that something you came up with yourselves, or did you partner with a training provider?
Yeah, it was a bit of both, actually, Claire. We didn't actually partner with a training provider. We partnered with a lawyer, actually.
Oh, okay.
But it's a lawyer who they do specialize in diversity. So they have a real the managing partner there has got a real passion for diversity and does quite a lot broader than just legal advice around it. So we partnered with her, and she was very early on her journey of trying to build training. So what we did is we collaborated with her. We kind of input into the training. She created some of it, and then we again collaborated on some of the workshop content as well. Certainly some of the areas that we were looking to, I suppose, highlight a little bit and amplify a little bit, particularly when it came to banter. That was a real, when I walked into the business, I know this isn't Huws Gray specific. It was a real problem right at senior level. So we just needed to start to really have some honest conversations about the impact and implications. So it was a bit of a joint effort.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Charlotte?
I think, Nikki, I was just wondering who helped you with your neurodiversity sheets, because I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, so we've worked with, it's not just one organisation or one partner. We actually did, we've built them out through a couple of routes. Firstly, through different organisations, depending whether they're charitable organisations, etc., depending on some of their specialist subjects. But also a little bit of sense checking from some of our colleagues as well. So it's a real kind of reality check that you get from just talking to people who might be kind of living with the condition, etc. So it was a bit of again, it wasn't a here's our partner, we've spent money on working with a partner. We've done it a little bit differently depending on what the condition is. And we've still got loads to do. We've got about 10 fact sheets at the moment. We've got a ton more to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your fact sheets, Nikki. I'm just wondering, you've got a whole list. I am wondering whether or not that's something we can look to collaborate on, share what other people are doing, and maybe divide and conquer some of that stuff as well. That was something
Yeah,
to do with
absolutely.
coalition.
Yeah, 100%.
Because I know quite a few people are starting to ask the question, particularly around neurodiversity as well. So yeah, it'd be good to share what we've got, what people are working on. Okay.
What was really interesting is that
Yeah.
we one of our head of internal comms, I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, our head of internal comms, or the interim we have, was helping us pull some of the kind of formatting together. And I won't say which condition, but one of the conditions her daughter has, and she read this fact sheet and she literally said, I'm blown away. I've sent it directly to my mum and dad because they just haven't got a clue how to deal with her. So it was like she was really pleased because she said it was just a really easy to digestible, etc. So that's great.